You think you know betrayal? Imagine your wife, calm as a spring morning, sitting you down to tell you she's already asked your own brother to be her boyfriend, and he said yes. My world shattered in that single gut-wrenching moment. My wife Vanessa sat across from me, looking completely unfazed, like she was just telling me about changing our Netflix password. "I've already asked your brother to be my boyfriend," she said, her voice even. "And he said yes." My jaw must have hit the floor. "What do you mean?" I managed, my voice a strangled whisper. "He said yes," she repeated, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "We've been married for 7 years. 7 years! And my younger brother, Logan, had been living with us for the past 3 months. His apartment flooded, he said. Needed a place to stay. And now this? He'd agreed that this arrangement made sense for everyone. My mind was reeling. Then she pulled out her laptop. A PowerPoint presentation. Can you believe the audacity? The title flashed on the screen, Our New Family Dynamic. And there, front and center, was a happy photo of the three of us from last Christmas. "I've thought this through rationally," she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. "And the benefits are clear." She clicked to the next slide, which had bullet points about household efficiency and shared expenses. My head was spinning. Just then, Logan, my own brother, walked in from the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. For her, not for me. He strolled right over, plopped down next to Vanessa on the couch, and they casually held hands. Right in front of me. "Hey bro," he said, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "We need to talk about the new arrangement." "New arrangement?" Vanessa jumped in, explaining how this was actually better for you, too. Better for me? My wife wanting to date my brother was better for me? I felt a surge of disbelief, quickly followed by a cold, searing anger. Logan chimed in, making it sound like he was doing me a favor. "You've been stressed with work lately, and having Logan help with my needs means less pressure on you." I wanted to scream. Vanessa, ever the organizer, clicked to another slide. This one was a weekly schedule. "See," she chirped. "Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you have me. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Logan has me. Sundays, we all spend together as a family." My days were in blue, Logan's in green, color-coded, like I was a chore, a task on a to-do list. "This way," she concluded, "everyone gets attention and no one feels neglected." I stood up, but my legs felt like jelly. "You made a schedule for dating my brother?" Vanessa nodded, beaming, clearly proud of her organization. "I also made a chore chart and a budget breakdown. Logan will contribute 30% to household expenses now as an official partner." Another slide, financial projections. We'd actually save money with 3 incomes. Logan took a leisurely sip from the coffee he'd made in my kitchen, using my mug. "Plus, I already live here," he added, touching Vanessa's knee, "so nothing really changes except we're being honest about feelings. We'd been feeling this connection for weeks. Weeks. They'd been planning this elaborate betrayal for weeks, while I went to work every day, thinking my marriage was normal, thinking my home was safe. "When did this start?" I demanded, the words raw. Vanessa looked thoughtful, then her eyes lit up. "Remember, when you had that conference in Dallas? Logan and I really bonded that weekend. That was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. I'd been gone 3 days. You slept with my brother while I was at a conference." They both laughed, like I'd said something utterly ridiculous. "We didn't sleep together." Logan quickly corrected, a hint of panic in his voice. "We just talked about our feelings and realized we're compatible." Vanessa added, "Logan would never cheat. That's why we're doing this ethically." Ethically. They kept using that word, this twisted justification for their deceit. Vanessa pulled out a printed document. "I found this polyamory agreement template online. We just need to sign it to make things official. 20 pages long, with sections about date nights and intimate boundaries." My name was already filled in. I noticed the date, 2 weeks ago. "We wanted to be prepared for this conversation," Logan said, scooting closer to her. "What about our marriage vows?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Vanessa just flipped to another slide, full of statistics. 20% of couples try ethical non-monogamy. We're actually being progressive. Logan nodded enthusiastically. "In some cultures, brothers share a wife. It's totally natural." He even pulled out his phone. "I already joined some online groups for this kind of thing." Then she showed another slide, a house floor plan. I'm thinking we convert the garage into a second master suite. That way, everyone has privacy. She'd already priced out contractors. $18,000. Exactly what we had in our savings. You want to spend our entire savings? You want to spend our entire savings? I practically yelled. Vanessa corrected me, her tone superior. A bedroom for my second partner. We need to stop thinking in terms of possession. Logan stood up, walked over, and put a hand on my shoulder. I know this is a lot, but we're trying something new and beautiful. We're in love whether you accept it or not. That's when I smiled. For the first time since this nightmare began. A cold, hard smile. You know what? I said, my voice dangerously calm. You're absolutely right. They both looked genuinely shocked. Really? Vanessa asked, suspicion coloring her tone. Really, I repeated. In fact, why don't we call my dad right now and tell him the good news? Logan went white. Why would we call Dad? I was already dialing, my finger hovering over the call button. To tell him about your new relationship, of course. I'm sure he'll want to know. Logan lunged, trying to grab my phone, but I was faster. Dad already answered on speaker, I announced, holding the phone aloft. Hey, son. How's everything? Dad's voice boomed from the speaker. Logan looked like he might throw up all over Vanessa's pristine PowerPoint. My dad, he raised us both. He knew Logan better than anyone. He'd always favored him too, until Logan borrowed money 3 times and never paid it back. Now, he was standing in my living room, holding hands with my wife, expecting me to just let this slide. Dad was still waiting, and I was going to give him an answer he'd never forget. What's going on over there? Dad's voice was firm, carrying that unique dad tone that meant he knew something was up. I looked right at Logan, a smirk playing on my lips. Dad, I have some really exciting news about Logan. He's got a new girlfriend, and you'll never guess who it is. Logan's eyes went wide. He started waving his hands, mouthing frantically at me to stop. Wait, Dad, it's not what it sounds like. He practically shrieked, his voice high and shaky. We were going to tell everyone in our own time, and this is really not fair. Vanessa, ever the professional, stepped forward. She placed a hand on Logan's shoulder, taking charge as if addressing a difficult client. Mr. Fritz, she began, her voice smooth and polished. This is Vanessa. I think there's been a misunderstanding about how we're framing this situation. What we're doing is exploring modern relationship structures that many healthy couples are adopting these days. It's actually quite common, and there's a lot of research showing the benefits of expanded family units. She used that calm, rational voice that used to make me feel safe, but now just made me want to throw something at her head. The phone went silent. 1 second. 2, 3, 4, 5 full seconds of nothing from my father. Vanessa's confident smile started to waver at the edges. Logan was gripping her arm so hard his knuckles turned white. Then Dad spoke, and his voice was flat, cold, a tone I'd only heard a few times in my entire life. Logan, are you sleeping with my older son's wife while you're living under his roof? Logan actually took a step back, as if the words themselves had pushed him. Dad, that's not exactly. I mean, we haven't technically. What I'm trying to say is that there's an emotional connection that developed naturally, and we have future plans that involve all 3 of us in a way that's fair and balanced. And Vanessa has a whole presentation that explains the structure, if you'd like to see it sometime. He was stumbling, making excuses. It was the first time I'd seen him lose that smug confidence since this whole nightmare started. Future plans, Dad repeated slowly. You have future plans to be with your own brother's wife. Logan nodded, even though Dad couldn't see him. Yes, sir. In an ethical framework that respects everyone's needs and boundaries. Modern psychology actually supports these kinds of arrangements when done correctly with open communication and clear expectations. That's when Logan started crying. Not quiet tears, but full-on sobbing, his shoulders shaking. I knew this would happen. He wailed. I knew everyone would react this way. Nobody ever supports my choices. Nobody ever wants me to be happy. You all just want to control my life and tell me what I can and can't feel. He was doing that thing. The thing he'd done since we were kids. He made himself the victim, no matter what he'd actually done. When he broke Mom's favorite lamp wrestling in the house, it was somehow my fault for not stopping him. When he got caught cheating on a test in high school, it was the teacher's fault for making the test too hard. And now here he was again, crying about how unfair everyone was being, while he stood in my living room holding my wife's hand. "Logan," Dad said through the phone, his voice still that scary calm, "put your brother on the phone, not on speaker. Just him." Logan looked at me, panic in his eyes. "Dad, we should all talk about this together as a family. That's what Vanessa says is the healthy way to handle these conversations." But I was already walking toward the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. "I'm here, Dad," I said, taking him off speaker and closing the door behind me. The kitchen was dark and quiet. I could still hear Logan crying in the living room, but it felt far away now. "I need you to pack a bag," Dad said, and his voice was different now. Softer, but serious in a way that made my throat tight. "Pack enough for a few days and come stay with me tonight. Don't argue with them. Don't explain anything. Just get your things and leave." I leaned against the counter, my hand shaking. "Dad, I don't even know what to do." They had a whole PowerPoint. They had a schedule with color coding. They already filled out some kind of contract. Dad made a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so angry. "Your brother has been pulling this kind of thing his whole life. But this is something else. You come here tonight and we figure out your next steps together. I know a divorce lawyer for my golf club. Good guy. Won the case for my friend when his wife tried to take everything. We're going to need someone like that." Divorce. The word hit me in the chest like a physical blow. But it also felt right. Like finally, someone was saying out loud what I'd been too scared to think. "What about Logan?" I asked. "What about him?" Dad's voice was hard. "He made his choice. He chose your wife over his own brother. That's not something you come back from. Now pack your bag and get out of there before they try to talk you into staying. Vanessa's got that smooth way of talking, and I don't want you listening to another word she says tonight." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, Dad, I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and stood in my dark kitchen for a minute, just breathing. Through the wall, I could hear Vanessa's voice, low and soothing, probably telling Logan that everything would be fine and that I'd come around once I had time to process. That was her favorite word, process. Like my whole life falling apart was just something I needed to think about a little longer before I agreed it was a good idea. But I wasn't going to process anything. I was going to pack a bag and go to my father's house and let someone who actually loved me help figure out how to fix this mess. I walked back through the living room without looking at either of them and went straight upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom. The bedroom I'd shared with Vanessa for 7 years, thinking we were building something real. I pulled out a suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. I could hear footsteps on the stairs, and then Vanessa appeared in the doorway looking worried for the first time since she'd started her stupid presentation. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight. "What did your dad say?" "What did your dad say?" I didn't answer. I just kept packing. Underwear, socks, the comfortable jeans I wore on weekends, my phone charger, the book I'd been trying to read for months but never had time for. "We should talk about this," Vanessa said, stepping into the room. "Running away to your father's house isn't going to solve anything. We need to have an adult conversation about our feelings and our future." I zipped the suitcase and finally looked at her. "My lawyer will be in touch," I said, and the shock on her face was worth every horrible minute of this night. I walked past her and down the stairs, where Logan was still sitting on the couch, surrounded by tissues. He looked up at me with red eyes. "Where are you going? We're not done talking." But I was done talking. I was so done. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove to my father's house. My phone buzzed with texts from both of them, but I didn't read a single one. The whole drive, I kept thinking about that schedule Vanessa had made. Blue for me, green for Logan. Like we were appointments in her calendar instead of people. Like 7 years of marriage meant nothing more than a time slot she could rearrange whenever she wanted. But that was over now. When I pulled into Dad's driveway and saw the porch light on waiting for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in hours. Safe. I was going to be okay. It might take a while and it might hurt like hell, but I was going to be okay because I had family that actually acted like family. Unlike my brother, who apparently thought family meant something very different, Dad was waiting for me in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee on the table, and that look on his face, that meant he'd been thinking hard about something. I sat down across from him and wrapped my hands around the warm mug while he just looked at me for a minute, like he was trying to figure out where to start. "There's something I need to tell you," he said finally, and the way he said it made my stomach feel cold. About a month ago, Logan called me asking for money, $5,000. He said it was for repairs at his apartment from flood damage. Dad rubbed his face with his hand, looking tired. He said the insurance wasn't covering everything and he needed help getting back on his feet. I thought about Logan living in my guest room for 3 months, eating my food, using my things, and apparently planning to take my wife the whole time. "Did you give it to him?" I asked. Dad shook his head. I told him I'd think about it. Something felt off about the whole thing. The way he was talking about how stressed he was at your place, how he might need to stay there longer than planned. He reached for his phone on the table. Now I know why he really wanted that money. He wasn't planning to fix his apartment. He was planning to stay with you forever. He unlocked his phone and started scrolling through messages. "I need to show you something, and I'm sorry because it's gonna hurt, but you need to see who your brother really is." He turned the phone toward me, and I saw a long chain of text messages between him and Logan going back months. Months of my brother complaining about me to our own father. "Read them," Dad said quietly. So I did. The first one was from 4 months ago, before the flood even happened. Logan had written that I was being controlling about the guest bathroom and wouldn't let him keep his stuff in there. That wasn't true. I just asked him to keep his razors off the counter because Vanessa used that bathroom too. The next message was worse. He told Dad that I was cold and distant with Vanessa and that he could see how unhappy she was. "She deserves better," he'd written. "Someone who actually pays attention to her instead of working all the time." I felt sick reading it. Another message from 2 months ago said, Vanessa had been confiding in him about our marriage problems and that he thought he could make her happier than I ever could. He'd actually written those words to our father. "He was telling you all this and you didn't warn me?" I looked up at Dad and he looked guilty. I thought he was just being dramatic. You know how Logan gets. He always has to make everything about himself. I didn't think he'd actually try to steal your wife. I thought he was just jealous and venting. He took the phone back and scrolled to another message. "Look at the date on this one." It was from 3 months ago, about a week before Logan's apartment flooded. He'd written to Dad saying that my marriage was falling apart and that he was worried about me, but also that maybe it was for the best because Vanessa needed someone who understood her. 1 week before the flood, I sat back in my chair and something clicked in my brain. "Dad, when exactly did Logan's apartment flood?" Dad looked at me, eyebrows raised. "About 3 months ago, middle of the month." "Why?" I did the math in my head. Logan had been texting Dad about my marriage problems and about how Vanessa deserved better, exactly 1 week before his apartment conveniently flooded and he needed to move in with us. 1 week before he suddenly had an excuse to be in my house every day while I was at work. 1 week before he started making coffee for my wife and bonding with her over their feelings. "Do you think he caused the flood on purpose?" I asked, and even as I said it, I knew it sounded crazy. But Dad didn't laugh. He just looked at me with this serious expression. "I think your brother saw an opportunity, and he took it. Whether he caused the flood or just used it, the timing is too perfect to ignore." He stood up and started pacing the kitchen, like he did when he was working through a problem. "We need to call your mother. She's 2 states away, but she always knew how to handle Logan's schemes when you boys were growing up. Remember when Logan convinced everyone at school that you stole his science project? Your mother was the one who figured out Logan had done the whole thing himself." I did remember that. I was 15 and Logan was 12. He'd copied my project and then told the teacher I'd stolen his work. Mom had gone to the school with both projects and pointed out that Logan's had my name whited out in one corner where he'd missed erasing it. Logan had cried and played the victim, and some people still believed his version. But at least the teacher knew the truth. "It's late," I said, looking at the clock on Dad's wall. "Mom's probably asleep. Your mother hasn't slept past 9 in 30 years, Dad said, already dialing. "She'll want to know about this." The phone rang twice before Mom picked up. "Dan, is everything okay? It's almost 10. I could hear the worry in her voice, even through the phone speaker. Dad put her on speaker and set the phone on the table between us. "The boys are having some trouble. Our older one is here with me now." Mom was quiet for a second. I had a feeling something was wrong. "Is it about Logan?" Dad and I looked at each other. "Why would you think that?" I asked. Mom sighed, and I could picture her sitting in her living room with her reading glasses on and a book in her lap. Because Logan called me last week asking the strangest questions. He wanted to know about brothers in the Bible, specifically whether there were any stories about brothers sharing the same wife. My jaw dropped. Dad closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. He was asking about those 7 brothers and the one woman, Mom continued. He said it was for a book club discussion, but Logan hasn't read a book since high school. I knew something was going on, but I didn't want to pry. Now I'm guessing I should have. Mom, I said, leaning toward the phone. Logan and Vanessa want to be in a relationship together while I'm still married to her. They made a PowerPoint presentation about it. The silence on the other end was longer this time. When Mom spoke again, her voice was hard in a way I rarely heard from her. They made a what? A PowerPoint, with schedules and charts and a contract. They want to date each other, and they want me to be okay with it. Logan's been living with us for 3 months, and apparently he's been working on Vanessa the whole time. Mom made a sound that was half laugh and half something else. That boy. That sneaky little boy. I should have known when he called about the Bible stories. He was looking for permission. He wanted me to say something that made it okay. Dad jumped in. He also asked me for $5,000 last month, said it was for apartment repairs. Now, we think he never planned to move back. He wanted to stay with them permanently. Of course he did, Mom said. Logan doesn't do anything without a plan. He's been like this since he was 6 years old and figured out he could get extra dessert by crying to each parent separately. She paused. What do you need me to do? Dad looked at me, and I looked back at him. For the first time since Vanessa had opened that stupid laptop, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. I had my dad in the kitchen with me and my mom on the phone, and they were both ready to help me fight. I don't know yet, I admitted. I just found out about all this tonight. Vanessa and Logan are still at my house, probably trying to figure out how to spin this. Dad gave me the name of a divorce lawyer. Good, Mom said firmly. Use it first thing Monday morning and don't go back to that house alone. Don't give them a chance to talk you into anything. Vanessa's got that way of making everything sound reasonable, and Logan knows exactly which buttons to push. She was right about that. Even now, part of my brain was trying to find excuses for them. Maybe they really did have feelings. Maybe I had been too focused on work. Maybe there was something wrong with me that made Vanessa look elsewhere. But then I remembered the schedule. Blue for me, green for Logan, like we were items on a to-do list instead of people. I'm not going back, I said, and I meant it. Good boy, Dad said quietly. Mom's voice came through the phone again. I'm looking at flights right now. I can be there Saturday morning. We'll figure this out together as a family, a real family, not whatever twisted thing Logan is trying to create. So, my brother had been laying groundwork with both parents, trying to find someone who would support his little takeover. He tested Dad with the money request. He tested Mom with weird Bible questions. And when neither parent gave him the green light, he went ahead anyway, thinking he and Vanessa could present it as a done deal I'd have to accept. What Logan didn't count on was that our family talks to each other. By midnight, both parents knew everything, and we had a group text going. Mom was booking a flight for the weekend. Dad was researching our state's divorce laws. And me? I was finally seeing my brother clearly for the first time in 30 years. I barely slept that night in Dad's guest room, but when I did finally drift off, I slept harder than I had in months. When I woke up, the sun was already bright through the curtains, and I could smell coffee from downstairs. I checked my phone and saw over 20 messages from Vanessa and a bunch from Logan, but I didn't open any of them. I just put my phone on silent and went down to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and his laptop open to some legal website. "Morning, son," he said without looking up. "There's coffee in the pot, and I already called that lawyer. He can see you Monday afternoon." I poured myself a cup and sat down across from him, feeling like maybe things were actually going to be okay. That's when we heard a car pull into the driveway. Dad looked up at me with his eyebrows raised and got up to look out the front window. His whole body went stiff. "It's Vanessa," he said, and his voice went flat and cold in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up. "She's getting out of her car with a folder." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But Dad put his hand up before I could even get out of my chair. "Stay here. Let me handle this." He walked to the front door, and I heard him open it before Vanessa could even knock. I moved closer to the doorway so I could see what was happening on the porch. Vanessa was standing there in her nice work blazer, looking like she'd practiced this whole thing in the mirror before driving over. She had a thick folder in her hands, and she was already opening her mouth to start talking. "We need to talk like adults," Vanessa said in that calm voice she always used when she was trying to sound reasonable. "Your son is overreacting by involving family in what should be a private matter between married people. If we could just sit down and discuss this rationally, I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone." Dad stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and didn't move an inch to let Vanessa inside. "You have exactly 2 minutes to explain yourself before I call the police for trespassing on my property." Vanessa didn't even blink at that. She just nodded like this was exactly what she expected and started pulling papers out of her folder. "I understand this seems unconventional," she said in that explaining voice, like she was talking to a slow child. "But if you look at these articles from relationship experts and psychologists, you'll see that polyamory is actually a healthy and normal lifestyle choice for many couples." She held up the paper so Dad could see the headers and the highlighted sections. "There's peer-reviewed research showing that people in consensual, non-monogamous relationships report high levels of satisfaction and communication. It's not something to be afraid of. It's actually progressive and modern, and many families are thriving with these arrangements." She held the papers out toward Dad like she expected my father to take them and read every word carefully. "This one is from a university study that shows children raised in polyamorous households have the same developmental outcomes as children in traditional families. And this one talks about how jealousy is actually a social construct that can be unlearned with proper communication techniques." Dad looked at the papers in Vanessa's outstretched hand for about 1 second. Then he reached out and took them. I watched from the doorway as my father held those articles that Vanessa had probably spent hours printing and highlighting, and then Dad tore them in half right down the middle. He didn't read a single word. He didn't even glance at what was printed on them. He just ripped them apart and let the pieces fall onto the porch floor at Vanessa's feet. Vanessa's mouth fell open, and for a second, she just stared at the torn paper on the ground like she couldn't understand what had just happened. "Sir, those were peer-reviewed studies from respected journals," she said, and I could hear her voice getting a little higher. "If you would just take the time to educate yourself about modern relationship structures, you would understand that what Logan and I are proposing is based on solid psychological principles. This isn't something we came up with on our own. There's a whole community of people who live this way happily." Dad didn't move. "You have about 90 seconds left." I watched Vanessa's face change as she tried to figure out what to do next. Her calm mask started to crack just a little around the edges. I could practically see her thinking fast, running through her mental list of arguments, trying to find a new angle that would work on my father. Then something shifted in her expression, and I knew whatever came out of her mouth next was going to make me angry. "Look, I didn't want to say this," Vanessa said, and her voice got lower like she was sharing something private. "But the truth is, your son has been emotionally distant for years. He works all the time. He's never home. When he is home, he's tired and stressed, and he doesn't have any energy left for me or our relationship." She spread her hands like she was being so honest and vulnerable. "I was lonely. I tried to talk to him about it, but he would just shut down. He doesn't communicate. He doesn't share his feelings. He comes home from work and stares at his phone and falls asleep on the couch." I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. She was blaming me. She was actually standing on my father's porch, trying to make this my fault. "After 7 years of trying, I finally found someone who actually listens to me and makes me feel valued," Vanessa continued. "Is it my fault that person happens to be his brother? I didn't plan for this to happen. Logan was just there. He understood me. He paid attention when your son wouldn't. He made me feel like I mattered. Can you really blame me for responding to that kind of connection?" Dad let her finish every word. He stood there with his arms crossed and his face like stone and let Vanessa say all of it. And when Vanessa was done and looking at Dad with that hopeful expression, like maybe she'd finally found the right argument, my father spoke. "My son will be in contact through his lawyer. Now get off my property." Vanessa actually took a step back, like the words had pushed her. "Wait, can't we at least talk about this? I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Your son is throwing away a 7-year marriage over a misunderstanding. Don't you think he owes it to himself to at least hear me out?" We have a house together. We have a life together. We have shared accounts and plans and history. You can't just throw all that away because you're upset. Dad's voice got even colder than I'd ever heard it. The only person who threw away this marriage is you. And if you're not off my property in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling the police. Then he shut the door. Not slammed it, just closed it firmly. Like Vanessa wasn't even worth the effort of a slam. I ran to the front window and watched Vanessa standing on the porch, looking completely lost. She stared at the closed door for a long moment, like she couldn't process what had just happened. Her mouth was moving a little, like she was still trying to think of the right words that would make the door open again. She looked down at the torn pieces of paper scattered on the porch floor. Slowly, she bent down and started picking them up, gathering the ripped articles in her hands like they still meant something. She stood there, holding those torn papers and looking at the door, and I could see on her face that she genuinely could not understand why her logic hadn't worked. In her mind, she'd come prepared. She'd done research. She printed evidence. She had arguments ready for every objection. How could anyone reject solid reasoning and peer-reviewed studies? She walked back to her car, still clutching those ripped-up articles like she didn't know what to do with them. She sat in the driver's seat for at least 2 full minutes, just staring through the windshield at Dad's house. Then finally, she started the car and pulled away. Dad came back into the kitchen and sat down across from me. "You okay?" he asked. I wasn't sure how to answer that. "She blamed me," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. She said I was emotionally distant. She said that's why she went after Logan, like I made her do it. Dad shook his head slowly. "That's what people like Vanessa do. They can't admit they did something wrong, so they find a way to make it someone else's fault. You could have been the perfect husband who did everything right, and she still would have found an excuse. That's how these people work. They twist everything around until somehow you're the bad guy for being upset that they hurt you." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "This is not your fault. Not any of it. Vanessa made a choice. And Logan made a choice. And now they get to live with those choices. But you don't have to live with them. You get to walk away and build something better." I felt tears building in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. What if she's right, though? What if I was a bad husband? Dad squeezed my hand. "Even if you work too much or were tired sometimes, which is just called being a normal person with a job, by the way. There's a word for what you do when you're unhappy in a marriage. It's called divorce, or counseling, or having an honest conversation. You don't go sneaking around with your husband's brother for weeks and then present it like a business proposal with slides and contracts. That's not what an unhappy wife does. That's what a selfish person does who wants everything her way." Vanessa sent 17 texts over the next 2 hours, and I watched each one come in without answering. First, she was being reasonable, saying we should talk this through like adults. Then she was apologetic, saying she never meant to hurt me and maybe the presentation was too much too fast. Then she got angry, saying I was destroying our family over a misunderstanding and that I was being dramatic. The last text said Logan was packing his things and leaving because I'd made him feel unwelcome in his own brother's home. His own brother's home. His own brother's home. My house that I paid the whole mortgage on. My kitchen where he made coffee and my mug for my wife. Dad saw my face while I read the texts and just shook his head. We both knew this wasn't over. Logan never went down without making sure everyone else went down too. When Mom landed Saturday morning, we would finally put an end to this. But first, Logan had one more trick up his sleeve. Friday night, I was sitting in Dad's living room, trying to watch some cooking show and not think about my life falling apart, when my phone rang. It wasn't Vanessa or Logan this time, but a friend I'd known for years and trusted. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked before I could even say hello. "I just saw Logan's post and I wanted to check on you." My stomach went tight. "What post?" There was a pause on the other end, like he couldn't believe I didn't know. He posted this really long thing on social media about 20 minutes ago. It's everywhere. People are sharing it and commenting, and I just thought you should know before you see it from someone else. I thanked him and hung up, immediately opening my phone to Logan's page. Dad looked up from his crossword puzzle when he heard my breathing change. "What is it?" he asked, but I couldn't answer because I was too busy reading what my brother had written about me to the whole world. The post was long, at least 5 paragraphs, and it had a photo at the top of Logan looking sad and hollow-eyed, like he'd been crying. The caption said, "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst." And then the rest of it was worse. He wrote about how he'd been living with me for 3 months after his apartment flooded and how I'd been cold and controlling the whole time. He said I made him feel unwelcome in his own family and that I'd always been jealous of him since we were kids. He talked about falling in love with someone unexpected and how love doesn't follow the rules we think it should. He never said Vanessa's name, but anyone who knew us would figure it out. The worst part was how he framed it. According to Logan's post, he hadn't done anything wrong. He just had feelings and been honest about them. And in response, his controlling older brother had kicked him out of the house and tried to turn their parents against him. He wrote that he was homeless now because of me, and that he'd lost his family over something he couldn't help. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he'd written at the end. "I just fell in love." Is that really so unforgivable? I thought family was supposed to support you no matter what. I guess I was wrong about what family means. I scrolled down to the comments and felt sick. There were already over 100 of them, and most were on Logan's side. "Your brother sounds so toxic," one person wrote. "Real family would be happy that you found love." Another comment said, "Love is love. It doesn't matter who it's with. Your brother needs to grow up and stop being so controlling." Someone else wrote, "This happens more than people realize. Your brother is just mad because he's insecure about his own marriage. You deserve to be happy." I kept scrolling, and it just got worse. People were calling me jealous and bitter and controlling. They said I was using this as an excuse to cut Logan out of the family because I'd always been threatened by him. One comment said, "Your brother sounds like one of those guys who can't stand when someone else gets attention. He's probably been waiting for a chance to get rid of you for years." Nobody was asking what Vanessa's role in all this was. Nobody was pointing out that Logan had moved into my house and then started going after my wife. In Logan's version of the story, he was just a guy who fell in love and got punished for it by his mean older brother. My hands were shaking as I started typing a response. I was going to tell everyone the truth. I was going to explain about the PowerPoint and the schedule and the contract they'd already filled out. I was going to post the screenshots of Logan's texts to Dad where he called me names and said he could make Vanessa happier. I was going to destroy his little victim story with facts. But before I could finish typing, Dad was beside me, gently taking the phone out of my hands. "Don't do that," he said, and his voice was calm but serious. "Whatever you're about to write, don't." I looked up at him, tears burning in my eyes. "He's lying about me to everyone. People think I'm the bad guy. They think I kicked him out for no reason. I have to defend myself." Dad shook his head slowly. "Let me tell you something my father told me a long time ago. Never fight a pig in mud. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it." He sat down next to me on the couch and put his hand on my shoulder. "If you respond to that post, you're playing his game. He wants you to fight with him in public, where everyone can see. He wants you to look angry and mean and defensive. Even if you tell the truth, people will just see two brothers fighting, and they'll believe whoever cries prettier. And we both know that's Logan." I knew he was right, but it still hurts so bad to see all those comments about me from people who didn't know anything about what really happened. So, I'm just supposed to let him say all this about me? Let all his friends think I'm this horrible person? Dad took his own phone out of his pocket. "No, you're going to let me handle this. There's a difference between fighting in public and fighting in private. Logan wants a public war because he knows how to play that game, but he doesn't want our family seeing those texts he sent me. He doesn't want anyone knowing what he really said about you behind your back." He scrolled through his phone until he found Logan's number. "You're going to call him?" I asked. "I'm going to give him a choice," Dad said. "He can take down that post by morning, or I start sharing some screenshots of my own. Let's see how sympathetic people are when they read what he really thinks of his brother." He hit the call button and put the phone on speaker so I could hear. It rang 3 times before Logan answered, and his voice was stuffy, like he'd been crying. "Dad," he said, and I could hear him trying to sound small and sad. "Dad, I'm so glad you called. I need to talk to you about what's happening. Nobody is listening to my side, and I just need someone to understand." Dad's voice was cold in a way I'd rarely heard from him. "Logan, I saw your post." There was a pause on the other end. I just needed people to know the truth. Everyone's against me, and I didn't do anything wrong. I just fell in love. "Is that really so bad?" You've always taught us to follow our hearts, and that's all I was doing. Dad cut him off. You have until morning to take down that post. Logan's voice changed, getting harder and more defensive. Why? Because it makes my brother look bad? He's the one who called you and made this into a big family drama. He's the one who kicked me out. I'm just telling my side of the story. I have a right to defend myself. Dad didn't raise his voice at all, but somehow that made it scarier. Let me explain something to you. I have every text you've ever sent me saved on this phone, including the ones where you called your brother a boring doormat, including the ones where you said Vanessa deserved better and you could make her happier, including the one where you asked me for $5,000 that we both know you never planned to use for apartment repairs. The line went silent. I could hear Logan breathing, but he didn't say anything. If that post is still up by tomorrow morning, Dad continued, I start sharing those texts with everyone. Your mother, your cousins, your aunts and uncles. Everyone in the family who's reading your little victim story right now. They can all see what you really said about your brother before you stole his wife. Logan's voice came back, smaller now. You wouldn't do that. I'm your son too. You stopped being my son when you decided to destroy your brother's marriage. Dad said, and his voice was still that scary calm. You have until morning. That's 12 hours to decide if you want the whole family knowing who you really are. He hung up before Logan could respond and set the phone down on the coffee table between us. I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Will you really send those texts to everyone? I asked. Dad nodded slowly. If he doesn't take it down, then yes. Everyone needs to know what kind of person Logan really is. He's counting on us being too polite to fight back. He's counting on family loyalty keeping his secrets safe. But he broke that loyalty when he went after you. He doesn't get to hide behind family anymore. We sat there in the quiet for a few minutes, and I kept refreshing Logan's page to see if the post was still up. The comments were still coming in, and people were still calling me names. But somehow it didn't hurt as much now because I knew Dad had those texts. I knew he was willing to use them, and I knew that by tomorrow morning either that post would be gone or Logan's whole victim story would fall apart in front of everyone who believed him. By Saturday morning, the post was gone, but the damage was done. Half our extended family had seen it. Cousins were texting me asking what was happening and if I was okay and whether the stuff Logan wrote was true. An aunt called Dad demanding to know why he was taking sides and saying that Logan was just a boy in love and I was being too harsh. Logan had turned my private humiliation into public entertainment. And even though he deleted everything, the screenshots were already spreading through family group chats. But here's the thing about Logan, he always overplays his hand. He gets so focused on winning the moment that he doesn't see what's coming next, because now he'd made this a family matter. He'd involved everyone with that post. And when Mom walked through Dad's front door that afternoon with her carry-on bag and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, I knew exactly whose side she was on. She gave me a long hug first, without saying anything, and then set her bag down in the hallway. She walked straight to the kitchen table and sat down with that look on her face that meant business. Dad and I sat down across from her, and she folded her hands on the table and looked at both of us. It's time for a family meeting. I felt my stomach get tight when Mom said those words, but I figured she meant just the three of us sitting down to figure out next steps. Then she looked at Dad and said something that made my heart drop. We need to invite Logan and Vanessa here, too. Everyone deserves a chance to speak their piece. I opened my mouth to argue, but she held up her hand. I know what you're going to say, but if we don't let them talk, then they'll always say we didn't give them a fair chance. They'll tell everyone we ganged up on them without hearing their side. We give them one chance to explain themselves in front of the whole family, and then we're done. Dad nodded slowly like he understood, even though I could see he didn't love the idea either. She has a point. If we shut them out completely, Logan will use that against us. He'll say we were too scared to hear the truth. I wanted to scream that we already knew the truth, and that giving them a platform was exactly what they wanted. But Mom was already pulling out her phone. I'll text Logan. Dad, you text Vanessa. Tell them to be here at 3 and that this is their one chance to make their case. I sat there feeling sick while my parents sent those texts. This was a mistake. I could feel it in my bones. Logan was good at talking his way out of things. And Vanessa had that calm, logical way of explaining stuff that made people nod along, even when she was saying crazy things. What if they actually convinced my parents? What if mom and dad heard their arguments and started to think maybe I was overreacting? The next few hours felt like waiting for a dentist appointment, except worse. I tried to eat lunch, but everything tasted like cardboard. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't focus on anything. I just kept looking at the clock and watching the minutes tick by until free. At 2:45, a car pulled into the driveway and my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Dad went to the window and his jaw got tight. It's Logan. I watched through the curtain as my brother got out of his car, and I barely recognized him. He was dressed nice, in a sharp button-down, like he was going to a job interview. His hair was combed and neat, and he was carrying a thick folder under his arm. He looked confident. He looked prepared. He looked like someone who had been practicing for this moment. Mom let him in, and Logan walked into the living room with his head held high, like he owned the place. He didn't even look at me. He just sat down in the big armchair across from the couch and crossed his legs and set his folder on his lap. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain," he said to mom and dad, completely ignoring me. "I know this has been hard for everyone, but I think once you understand the research behind what Vanessa and I are proposing, you'll see that we're not doing anything wrong." He patted the folder on his lap. "I brought some materials from relationship experts and psychologists who specialize in alternative family structures. There's actually a lot of science supporting what we're trying to do." I wanted to throw something at him, but I just sat there with my hands in my lap trying to keep my face calm. A few minutes later, another car pulled up, and Vanessa walked in carrying her laptop bag, like she was showing up for a business meeting. She nodded at Dad and Mom, and then sat down next to Logan on the love seat. They didn't hold hands this time, but they sat close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. "I appreciate you all being willing to have this conversation," Vanessa said in that smooth voice I used to love. "I know my presentation the other day was a lot to take in, but I've put together some new materials that I think will help everyone understand that this isn't a betrayal. It's actually a legitimate lifestyle choice that millions of people around the world practice successfully." She pulled her laptop out of her bag and started setting it up on the coffee table. "If you'll just give me a few minutes to show you some of the research, I think you'll see that what Logan and I are proposing is based on solid psychological principles." Mom held up her hand. "Before you start with any presentations, I think Logan should speak first. He's the one who posted all that stuff online. He's the one who started this whole public mess. Let him say his piece." Logan nodded like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. He stood up from his chair and faced my parents like he was giving a speech at school. I could tell he practiced this. Every word was smooth and perfect, and he never stumbled or paused. "I want to start by saying that I never meant to hurt anyone," Logan began. "I know how this looks from the outside, but you have to understand that falling in love isn't something you can control. It just happens. And what happened between me and Vanessa was real and pure and beautiful." He put his hand on his chest like he was feeling all these deep emotions. "The truth is that my brother never appreciated what he had. For years, I watched Vanessa try so hard to make him happy, and for years, I watched him ignore her. He was always too busy with work. He was always too tired to spend time with her. He would come home and barely say 2 words to her before falling asleep on the couch. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Mom gave me a look that said, 'Wait.' So I sat there and listened while my brother kept talking about how I was a bad husband who didn't deserve my wife. 'Vanessa is such a special person,' Logan continued. 'She's smart and caring, and she gives so much to the people she loves. But my brother couldn't see that. He took her for granted every single day. And when I moved in and started getting to know her, I saw what he was missing. I saw this amazing woman who just wanted someone to appreciate her.'" He looked right at Mom now, and his eyes were getting shiny like he might cry. "Our connection is real. I know you might not understand it, but what Vanessa and I have is something special. We didn't plan for this to happen. We didn't go looking for it. It just grew naturally from spending time together and really seeing each other." He held up his folder. "And before you say that what we're doing is wrong, I want you to know that there's real science behind this. Polyamory is practiced by millions of people all over the world. There are therapists and relationship experts who specifically help families like ours navigate these kinds of arrangements. This isn't some crazy thing we made up. It's a legitimate lifestyle that many happy, healthy families choose." He opened his folder and pulled out some printed pages. I have articles here from psychology journals. I have testimonials from people who live this way and love it. I have research showing that children raised in polyamorous households do just as well as children in traditional families. This isn't about cheating or betrayal. This is about expanding our understanding of love and family. He set the papers on the coffee table next to Vanessa's laptop. All I'm asking is that this family evolves its thinking. That instead of judging us, you try to understand us. That instead of shutting us out, you accept that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. He sat back down and looked at me for the first time since he'd started talking. I love you, bro. I never wanted to hurt you, but I also love Vanessa, and I'm not going to apologize for that. The heart wants what the heart wants. The room went quiet when he finished. Nobody said anything for what felt like forever. I looked at Mom and her face was unreadable. I looked at Dad and he was staring at the floor. Vanessa was nodding along like everything Logan said made perfect sense. And suddenly, I felt this cold fear creeping up my spine because Logan had been really good. He'd been calm and reasonable. And he'd hit all the right emotional notes. He made himself sound like the victim of his own feelings instead of a schemer who plotted to steal his brother's wife. For just a moment, I wondered if maybe he was actually getting through to them. Maybe Mom was thinking about all those articles about polyamory. Maybe Dad was remembering how stressed I'd been at work lately. Maybe they were starting to think that I was the unreasonable one for not being more open-minded about this. Vanessa leaned forward with her laptop, ready to start her presentation, and I could see she thought she was winning. She had that little smile on her face that she always got when a meeting was going her way. And I sat there on my parents' couch feeling smaller and more scared than I had since this whole nightmare started because my brother had just given the performance of his life. And I wasn't sure anyone could see through it. Mom let Logan finish his whole speech and she let Vanessa set up her laptop. And for a few horrible seconds, I really thought they might have won because the room was so quiet and nobody was jumping in to defend me. But then Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. And I saw Logan's eyes go to that stack, and something in his face changed just a little. Before we look at any more articles about polyamory, Mom said in that calm voice she used when she was about to drop a bomb, I think we need to talk about something else first. Something about your apartment flood, Logan. Logan's competent posture got a little stiffer. What about it? My apartment flooded and I lost everything. That's why I had to move in with my brother. Everyone knows that. Mom nodded slowly. Yes, the flood was real. I called your landlord last week to ask about it. He confirmed the whole building had water damage from a broken pipe upstairs. She flipped through her papers until she found what she was looking for. But here's the interesting part. Your renter's insurance paid out $8,000 for your losses. I have the claim receipt right here. She held up a printed document and I could see numbers on it even from across the room. $8,000, Logan. That's a lot of money for someone who supposedly needed $5,000 from his father for repairs. Logan's face was getting pale, but he kept his voice steady. I used that money to replace my furniture and clothes. Everything got ruined in the flood. Mom shook her head. No, you didn't, because I also talked to your friend from college, the one you've been texting about all of this for months. She pulled out more papers, and these ones look like printed text messages with phone numbers at the top. He was very helpful once I explained what was happening. He sent me everything. Logan stood up fast, and his folder fell off his lap, scattering articles all over the floor. You had no right to go through my private messages. That's an invasion of my privacy. Whatever he showed you is taken out of context. But Mom was already reading from the first page. This is from 3 months ago, 2 weeks before your apartment flooded. You wrote to your friend, and I quote, I'm going to move in with my brother for a while. Vanessa's already paying attention to me when he's not around. It won't take long to get her hooked. The room went dead silent. Vanessa's little smile disappeared, and she looked at Logan with confusion on her face. What is she talking about? She asked. You told me the flood forced you to move in. You said it was an emergency. Logan held up his hands. She's twisting my words. I was just joking around with my friend. We say stupid stuff to each other all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Mom kept reading. Here's another one, from 2 months ago. You wrote, Vanessa is so easy to manipulate. She thinks I actually care about her feelings, but really I just tell her what she wants to hear. Once I get her hooked, I'll convince her to divorce my brother and keep the house. It's a nice house, and I deserve it more than he does. Vanessa stood up from the love seat and took a step away from Logan. You said that about me? You said I was easy to manipulate? Her voice sounded different now, smaller and confused, like a kid who just found out Santa wasn't real. Logan reached for her arm. Babe, that's not what I meant. I was just venting to my friend. You know how guys talk. We exaggerate everything. I didn't mean any of it, but Mom wasn't done. She flipped to another page and her voice got harder. This one is my personal favorite, from 6 weeks ago, right after my son went to that work conference. You wrote, my brother is such a boring doormat. He doesn't deserve a wife like Vanessa. She needs someone exciting and fun, someone like me. He just works all the time and ignores her. I'm going to give her everything he won't, and then I'm going to take everything he has. He looked up from the paper and stared right at Logan. A boring doormat. That's what you called your own brother while you were living in his house and eating his food and planning to steal his wife. I sat there, frozen on the couch, listening to my mother read my brother's real thoughts out loud. All those texts Logan had sent to Dad calling me controlling and cold. All those complaints about how I didn't appreciate Vanessa. None of it was because he cared about her. He didn't love Vanessa at all. He just wanted what I had. The house, the wife, the life I'd spent years building. Vanessa was staring at Logan like she'd never seen him before. You used me, she said, and her voice cracked a little. This whole time, I thought we had something real. I thought you understood me, but you were just playing a game. Logan tried to laugh it off, but it came out wrong. Too high and too fake. Vanessa, come on. Those texts don't mean anything. I was just being dramatic with my friend. You know how I feel about you. What we have is real. I love you. But even I could see that his mask was slipping. He didn't look confident anymore. He looked scared. Dad stood up from his chair and walked over until he was standing right in front of Logan. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice at all. He just looked at him with this expression on his face that I'd never seen before, like he was looking at a stranger instead of his own son. I'm gonna ask you one question, Dad said slowly, and I want you to tell me the truth. For once in your life, tell me the truth. Logan swallowed hard and didn't say anything. Did you ever love Vanessa? Or was this always about getting what your brother had? The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Logan opened his mouth to answer, and then closed it again. He looked at Vanessa, and then at Mom, and then at me, and I watched something break behind his eyes. He couldn't lie anymore. The texts were right there in black and white. Everyone had heard what he really thought, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Logan had nothing to say. His silence stretched on for 5 seconds, then 10. Vanessa made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not really. Oh my God, she said quietly. Oh my God, I'm such an idiot. She sat back down on the love seat and put her head in her hands. I believed everything you said. I thought we had this deep connection. I was ready to blow up my whole marriage for you. She looked up at Logan with something like disgust on her face. You made me think my husband was the problem. You made me think he didn't appreciate me, but it was all just a game to you. I was just a way to get his house. Logan finally found his voice. That's not fair. I do have feelings for you. Maybe the way I talked to my friend was wrong, but that doesn't mean what we have isn't real. You felt it too, Vanessa. You can't fake that kind of connection. But Vanessa was shaking her head. I don't even know what was real anymore. Everything you told me about my marriage, about my husband being distant and cold, was that just stuff you made up to turn me against him? Did you even mean any of it? Or were you just telling me what I wanted to hear like you said in those texts? Logan didn't have an answer for that either. I watched my brother standing in the middle of my parents' living room with his sharp outfit and his neatly combed hair and his folder of articles scattered all over the floor. He'd spent months planning this. He tested both our parents to see if they'd support him. He'd manipulated my wife with fake vulnerability and practiced speeches about connection, and now it was all falling apart because Mom did what Logan never expected. Mom did her own research. I stood up from the couch and my legs felt strong for the first time in days. I looked at Vanessa, who was still sitting there with her head in her hands, looking like her whole world had just collapsed. The divorce papers will be ready Monday, I said, and my voice came out steady and calm. You can expect to hear from my lawyer by the end of the week. Vanessa looked up at me, and for a second I thought she might try to apologize or explain or ask for another chance. But she just nodded slowly like she knew she'd lost the right to ask for anything. Then I turned to Logan, who was still standing there with his mouth open like he couldn't believe this was really happening. You have 48 hours to get your things out of my house, I said. After that, whatever's left goes on the lawn. Logan's face twisted into something ugly. You can't do that. That's my stuff. I have rights. Dad stepped forward. Actually, he can. It's his house, and you've been staying there as a guest who's no longer welcome. I suggest you start packing. Logan looked around the room like he was searching for someone to take his side. He looked at Mom, but Mom was staring at him with cold disappointment. He looked at Dad, but he had that same stranger look on his face. He looked at Vanessa, but she wouldn't even meet his eyes. And finally, he looked at me, his older brother, who he'd called a boring doormat, whose wife he'd tried to steal, whose life he'd tried to take over. This isn't fair, Logan said, and his voice was shaking. I made one mistake. I fell for the wrong person. That doesn't mean you get to throw me away like I'm nothing. I'm still your brother. I thought about all those texts Mom had read out loud, all the planning and scheming and lying, all the times Logan sat across from me at my own kitchen table, drinking coffee from my mug while secretly plotting to take everything I had. You're right, I said. You are my brother, and that makes what you did even worse because I trusted you. I let you into my home when you needed help, and you used that to try to destroy my marriage and steal my wife and take my house. I grabbed my keys from the counter and walked toward the door. 48 hours, Logan. Then your stuff is on the lawn, and I never want to see you again. I walked out of my parents' house and got in my car and sat there for a minute just breathing. Through the window, I could see Logan inside, still trying to argue with Mom and Dad, while Vanessa sat on the love seat looking like someone had punched her in the stomach. But I didn't care about any of them anymore. I pulled out of Dad's driveway and headed home to the house that was still mine, the house I paid for, the house where I'd be sleeping alone tonight for the first time in 7 years. And for the first time in 7 years, alone sounded like the best thing I'd ever heard. What would you have done in my place, facing such a calculated betrayal? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.